Hello everyone, and welcome to my CBS Wonderful Today channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The pressure in Genoa City had reached a boiling point, and the walls of Newman Enterprises sounded to fluctuate under the weight of secrets long buried, whispers long avoided, and trueness too painful to defy. Matt's presence in the extension that evening was heavy with apprehension. He'd spent numerous nights scuffling with the eating anxiety that comes from knowing the history you've been shielded from is about to explode in the faces of those you watch about utmost. Jack Abbott, ever the watchful and controlling father figure, paced the length of the commodious living room with his customary mix of desirousness and solicitude, glancing constantly at the staircase, each echoing step of Matt amplifying his apprehension. Diane, meanwhile, floated near the ornate fireplace, her fritters nervously entwined, a stark discrepancy to her usual composed, razor-sharp address. There had always been a fragile veneer over her confidence, one that cracked under the pressure of Matt's exposures. For weeks, Matt had scuffled intimately with the burden of the verity, a verity about his lineage that, if revealed, would shatter alliances, rewrite histories, and challenge commitment that had sounded unbreakable. As he stepped into the room, his eyes met Diane's, and for the briefest moment, time sounded to stall. The hum of the megacity outdoors faded, the ticking of the antique timepiece on the mantel grew blaring, and the air itself felt charged, heavy with expectation and dread. The verity about his parents, Jack, the primogenitor with a heritage of ambition and pride, and Diane, whose history had been precisely curated, polished into the interpretation of herself the world knew, was a disclosure that hovered to upend not only domestic ties but the intricate social chassis of Genoa City itself. Matt drew a deep, pulsing breath, feeling every twinkle in his casket like a drumroll publicizing the ineluctable storm. He began to speak, his voice wavering at first but gradationally gaining strength, carrying every ounce of fear, guilt, and courage he'd amassed over times of silence. The words tumbled out, admissions of events long denied, connections long obscured, and choices made by others that had resounded through his life in ways he'd only lately begun to understand. Jack sat mid-step, eyes widening, jaw tightening, the weight of the disclosure hitting him like a freight train. Diane's hand flew to her mouth, eyes glistering with unshed gashes, a admixture of shock, remorse, and sweat etched across her features. Matt revealed how he'd discovered the verity, not in a neat, accessible concession, but erected together from old letters, half-heard exchanges, and the fractions of a history that had been designedly concealed. Each detail he spoke sounded to skim around the room, bouncing off the walls, the cabinetwork, and the veritably hearts of those hearkening. The story of Jack and Diane's involvement, of choices made under constraint, of moments when love disaccorded with ambition, unfolded in a shade so intricate and emotionally charged that indeed the seasoned stages of Genoa City's social scene would have broken unbelief. Jack's mind contended, sifting through recollections, trying to attune the man he allowed. He knew with the consequences of conduct from decades past, the kind that had been hidden beneath layers of pride and denial. Diane's countenance, long a guard against the judgment of others, dissolved fully as she plodded to respond, not with words, for none sounded acceptable, but with the raw vulnerability of a parent brazened by the consequences of once miscalculations. Matt's concession didn't simply reveal lineage, it exposed the fragile vestments of trust and deception that had held their family together, forcing each existent to define not only who they were but who they had been forced to come by circumstances, choices, and the complicated social prospects of Genoa City. As the disclosure sank in, silence dominated the room for a moment so profound it sounded nearly impious. Also, the storm of feelings erupted. Jack, furious yet equivocal, demanded explanations for every elision, every taradiddle, every precisely concealed secret, his voice a blend of outrage and heartache. Diane, pulsing, tried to justify opinions that had sounded necessary at the time, but the words faltered, shy against the tidal surge of verity now laid bare. Matt, for his part, felt a strange blend of emancipation and vulnerability. The weight of times of silence was eventually lifted, yet it left him exposed, raw, and uncertain of what would come next. Outside the walls of the extension, Genoa City hummed obliviously, ignorant of the seismic shifts in one of its most fabled families, yet outside, the dynamics had formally begun to change irrevocably. Every regard, every gesture, Every implied study between the triad carried the echoes of new power balances, arising alliances, and the ineluctable competitions that follow similar exposures. Jack's mind, always strategizing, now had to regard not only for business enterprises but for deeply particular reckonings, while Diane grappled with the consummation that her precisely constructed world was fracturing in ways she could neither prognosticate nor control. Matt, at the center of this domestic earthquake, set up himself facing a paradoxical freedom. The verity had been confessed, yet its consequences were just beginning to unfold, promising heartache, conciliation, and maybe a conditional reconditioning of connections that had been tested by dishonesty, elision, and implied trueness. As the night strengthened and the megacity lights flitted like distant stars beyond the extension windows, each character sat with the fate of disclosure, the air thick with emotion, pressure, and the implied understanding that nothing would ever be the same again. The concession, though monumental in its impact, was only the morning. The real drama of navigating remission, responsibility, and the involved web of love and fidelity in Genoa City had only just commenced. For Matt, Jack, and Diane, the days ahead would be a trial of adaptability, testing bonds forged in fire and forcing them to defy not only the miscalculations of the history but the possibilities of redemption, understanding, and, maybe, a fragile stopgap that the verity, formally unveiled, could eventually serve as a foundation for a stronger, more authentic connection among them. In the weeks to follow, every commerce, every rumored discussion, and every regard would carry the weight of Matt's disclosure, splashing through the fabric of Newman and Abbott family dynamics, challenging commitment, and reconsidering connections in ways that were as changeable as they were ineluctable. And yet, amidst the chaos, the pressure, and the heartache, there was a subtle pledge bedded in Matt's courage that honesty, no matter how painful, had the power to illuminate indeed the darkest corners of deception, offering a chance for conciliation, understanding, and a future that could, at last, be erected on verity. The tension in Genoa City had reached a boiling point, and the walls of Newman Enterprises seemed to tremble under the weight of secrets long buried, whispers long avoided, and truths too painful to confront. And on that fateful evening, as the city lights flickered in the distance and the soft hum of traffic echoed through the high-rise, Matt's presence in the penthouse carried a gravity that no one could ignore. He had wrestled privately for months with the knowledge of his parentage, haunted by fragmented memories, cryptic comments overheard in corridors, and the unsettling sense that the life he had known was only a carefully constructed illusion. And as he ascended the staircase toward the living room where Jack Abbott paced like a caged lion, his mind a mix of calculation and simmering anxiety, Diane's composed exterior began to betray subtle signs of agitation. Her fingers nervously entwined as though the tension might be absorbed through her touch, and the atmosphere was charged with a foreboding energy, thick with anticipation, dread, and the unspoken understanding that the coming confession would ripple through every corner of their tightly controlled world. For Matt had arrived not merely to speak but to unravel the intricate tapestry of secrets and lies that had defined his existence, revealing not only the truth about who his parents were but also the choices, betrayals, and consequences that had been carefully hidden for decades. And the moment he drew in a deep breath, ready to speak, the room seemed to hold its breath with him, as if time itself paused to witness the eruption of long-suppressed realities, the confrontation of past misdeeds, and the shattering of illusions that had allowed everyone to live in comfortable ignorance. He began slowly, cautiously, recounting the fragments he had discovered through old letters, medical documents, whispered confessions, and memories pieced together with painstaking care, each revelation striking with the precision of a scalpel, exposing layers of deception, suppressed emotions, and the complexities of choices made under duress or fear. And as the story unfolded, Jack's usual air of control wavered, his brow furrowing, lips tightening, his mind racing to reconcile the man he believed he knew himself to be with the consequences of past actions he had either ignored or actively concealed, while Diane, whose poise was legendary in social and corporate circles alike, found herself unraveling. Unable to reconcile her cultivated self-image with the messy, raw truth now articulated by the very person she had nurtured and protected, and Matt's voice, initially tentative, grew stronger with each word, carrying the weight of guilt, relief, and unshakable determination to set the record straight. And as he revealed the tangled web of relationships, deceptions, and hidden truths, of how Jack and Diane had navigated their own ambitions, fears, and vulnerabilities while trying to shape Matt's life in ways they deemed protective but ultimately restrictive. Each sentence reverberated through the room, striking at the core of familial identity, loyalty, and trust, leaving both parents suspended in a liminal space of shock, anger, and reluctant empathy. For the truth was neither simple nor singular, but a mosaic of circumstance, choice, and human imperfection. And as Matt continued, he disclosed long-held secrets about medical histories, paternity doubts, financial maneuvers, and emotional manipulations that had created an invisible architecture of control and uncertainty, each revelation layering onto the last, producing a crescendo of emotional intensity that seemed almost unbearable, and yet necessary, for only by confronting these truths could the family hope to navigate the aftermath with any semblance of honesty or integrity. And outside the penthouse, Genoa City carried on obliviously, unaware of the seismic emotional shifts that were reshaping the core of one of its most storied families, while within, Jack's usually decisive mind reeled, processing betrayals both real and perceived, recalculating strategies for family, business, and personal redemption, his anger flaring then subsiding, replaced by a contemplative grief that threatened to undermine his habitual control, while Diane, simultaneously mourning the loss of the idealized past and grappling with the recognition of her own mistakes, struggled to articulate her thoughts, her voice trembling with a combination of shame, fear, and maternal protectiveness. And as Matt concluded his confession, a silence fell so profound that even the distant city sound seemed to vanish, leaving only the three of them suspended in a moment that was both catastrophic and cathartic. And in that silence, every glance and every small gesture carried immense weight, for they were the first unguarded indicators of the next phase of their relationship, a period defined not by the illusions of the past but by the raw, unfiltered reality that had finally been acknowledged. And yet, even as relief mingled with uncertainty, the practical implications of the revelation began to assert themselves. Questions about legal rights, inheritance, business positions, and social perception in the broader Genoa City community loomed large, each demanding careful navigation. Yet every decision now had to be informed by the unavoidable truth, a truth that Matt had courageously chosen to confront despite knowing the personal cost. And as the hours passed, the conversation shifted from immediate shock to reflection and cautious planning, with Jack intermittently pacing, occasionally sitting to gather thoughts, occasionally gesturing with hands clenched in both frustration and a deep, paternal concern, while Diane oscillated between tears and attempts at composed speech, her words occasionally betraying the fear that the public revelation could irreversibly alter both their reputations and personal relationships. And Matt, having unburdened himself of the long-hidden truth, felt a complex mixture of vulnerability, empowerment, and anticipation, sensing that while the confession marked an ending, it also signaled the beginning of an entirely new dynamic, one in which honesty, accountability, and emotional courage would define interactions, choices, and family connections in ways that were unpredictable, volatile, and deeply transformative. And the aftershocks of the revelation spread outward almost immediately, affecting not only their immediate household but also extended family members, friends, and business associates, each poised to respond to shifts in loyalty, power, and trust. And as Jack and Diane attempted to navigate this new reality, they began to confront the accumulated consequences of years of omission and suppression. Each memory, each prior decision, now viewed through the lens of Matt's confession, forcing introspection, regret, and a reconsideration of values and priorities. And in private moments, Matt reflected on the irony that the very secrecy intended to protect him had instead created a fragile, tension-filled environment, one that could only be healed through radical transparency, honest dialogue, and the willingness of all involved to accept both the human flaws and the profound bonds that defined their family. And as days turned into nights, and nights into moments of delicate negotiation and emotional recalibration, the trio began to tentatively explore the possibilities of reconciliation, understanding, and mutual respect, knowing that the foundation of trust would need to be painstakingly rebuilt, yet understanding that the first step had already been taken through Matt's courageous act of confession. And even as they faced external pressures from the media, business rivals, and the ever-watchful residents of Genoa City, they discovered that the emotional landscape within the family could not be ignored, for it was the emotional truth, far more than any public perception, that would ultimately dictate the depth, strength, and longevity of their bonds. And in those quiet, reflective moments between confrontations, arguments, and reconciliations, each person, the father, the mother, the child, grappled with questions of identity, legacy, and the delicate interplay between past mistakes and future possibilities, understanding that while the truth had been painful, it also provided clarity, direction, and the potential for a more authentic connection moving forward. And as the narrative of this revelation unfolded over days and weeks, the characters of Jack, Diane, and Matt began to navigate a complex web of interpersonal dynamics, emotional reckonings, and social expectations, each interaction carrying the subtle weight of prior deception, newfound understanding, and the cautious hope that honesty might serve as a bridge across the fractured landscape of family loyalty, love, and personal integrity. And while moments of tension, misunderstanding, and lingering resentment persisted, there was also a growing recognition that transparency, courage, and the willingness to confront difficult truths could ultimately foster a resilience and depth in relationships previously unseen, shaping not only the immediate responses to Matt's revelation but also the long-term evolution of family dynamics, personal growth, and emotional resilience in ways that were as unpredictable as they were inevitable. And in the end, the confession became not just a single event but a catalyst for transformation, a turning point in which past mistakes, long-hidden secrets, and the fragile architecture of familial relationships collided to create a future defined not by illusion but by the unvarnished, sometimes messy, yet profoundly human reality of love, accountability, and the enduring quest for understanding in the midst of life's most challenging truths. The fate of Matt's disclosure gurgled through the extension like a shockwave that refused to dissipate, settling into every corner of Newman Enterprises and into the hearts of everyone present, while outdoors, the lights of Genoa City glistered with the unconscious serenity of a world untouched by the storm of trueness being laid bare within its altitudinous structures. Yet outside, Jack's mind contended furiously, every memory now scanned under the harsh light of Matt's concession. Each decision he'd Madeira examined for motives, mistakes, and deletions, and as he sat heavily on the leather armchair near the extensive window, gaping blankly at the megacity below, he realized that the precisely constructed persona he'd reckoned on for decades was now shy in the face of the vulnerability his son's courage demanded, while Diane, perched near the grand piano, her fritters tracing unnoticeable patterns across its polished face, felt a profound admixture of fear, remorse, and reticent pride, fating that Matt's frankness exposed the fragility of her own defenses and the extent to which her once conduct, though guided by love, had inadvertently contributed to an emotional geography filled with pressure, distrust, and unacknowledged pain. And as the silence dallied, it was pointed only by the quiet hum of the structure's ventilation system and the distant enchantresses that sometimes reminded them of a megacity ignorant of the intimate bouleversement it had just witnessed. And yet, indeed in that silence, the room bucketed with implied understanding, for Matt's words had forced the family to defy the reality that their history wasn't simply a series of events but a living, breathing web of choices, consequences, and emotional debts. And as Jack tried to speak, his voice cracked under the weight of both authority and vulnerability, demanding explanations for deletions he now knew were deliberate, while Diane plodded to attune her desire to cover Matt with the inarguable verity that protection at the expenditure of honesty had fostered confusion, resentment, and instability. And in those moments, Matt observed both parents with an admixture of empathy and determination, knowing that while the disclosure was painful, it also offered a rare occasion for genuine dialogue, for the first time allowing each party to articulate not only what had been hidden but also how it had shaped their individualities, solicitations, and fears. And as he continued to reuse internally, he realized that understanding wasn't a direct path but a maze of feelings, taking tolerance, courage, and a amenability to admit miscalculations without letting shame dominate the converse. And with that mindfulness, he allowed himself to feel a quiet sense of commission, a recognition that by speaking the verity, he'd reclaimed agency over his own narrative. Indeed, if the consequences would continue to unfold unpredictably across the involved connections of his family, and in the following hours, as the night strengthened and the megacity